Commander Vex Corthoin had witnessed 17 different species attempt to drink themselves into oblivion, and the human was doing it wrong. Instead of the usual posturing, chest beating, or ritual vomiting that accompanied serious intoxication across the known galaxy, the Terran simply sat at the far end of the Nexus Station cantina, methodically working through something amber and potent while reading what appeared to be a technical manual on atmospheric processors. Completely backward approach to warfare, Thess was saying, her four arms gesticulating wildly as synthetic alcohol coursed through her exoskeleton's filtration systems. The Scarith warrior had been holding court for the better part of an hour, explaining to anyone within earshot why humans were fundamentally unsuited for real combat. All this technology, all these projectile weapons, and what happens when you take away their boomsticks? Soft bipeds waving metal rods around like children playing with kitchen utensils. Quinn 7's optical sensors flickered in what passed for amusement among the machina. Statistical analysis supports this assessment. Human muscular density, suboptimal. Bone structure, fragile. Reaction time, adequate at best. Remove their technological advantages, and they become... The cybernetic being paused, processing. Decorative mammals. Borak grunted his agreement, though the massive Threnodi's version of a grunt could have been mistaken for a seismic event. Standing nearly 3 meters tall and possessing the approximate mass of a small asteroid, Borak's opinion carried literal weight in discussions of physical prowess. Saw one once, on Kepler Station. Tiny thing, all pink and squishy. Couldn't lift standard cargo containers. Needed mechanical assistance for basic labor. Vex found himself oddly fascinated by this debate, though he'd never admit it to his subordinates. The Zenthari prided themselves on tactical analysis, and humans had been in persistent puzzle since first contact. On paper, they shouldn't have survived their own planet, let alone achieved interstellar travel. Their homeworld was a death trap masquerading as a garden paradise. Predators at every level of the food chain, weather patterns that could kill without warning, and geological instability that would have driven any sensible species to extinction. Yet here they were, establishing trade routes and diplomatic stations with the same casual efficiency they brought to everything else. It was annoying. The documentary evidence suggests otherwise, interjected Dr. Keela, her crystalline voice carrying the authority of someone who had actually studied the subject. The Viridian xenobiologist's research on human combat techniques had become required reading at several military academies, though mostly as a study in creative applications of primitive tactics. Their historical records contain extensive documentation of hand-to-hand combat systems, some dating back thousands of years. Theis's laugh was like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. Historical records of what? Dancing around each other until someone gets tired? I've seen the footage, Keela. Lots of grappling, some inefficient striking patterns, and eventually one participant falls down. It's barely more sophisticated than mating rituals. At least their mating rituals don't involve ritual disembowelment, Quinn 7 observed, with typical machina bluntness. That's because they're too fragile for proper mating combat, Borak rumbled. Probably die from minor impacts. The human at the end of the bar hadn't looked up from her manual, but Vex noticed her posture had shifted slightly. The change was subtle, shoulders settling back, weight distributing differently on the bar stool. Someone less observant might have missed it entirely. Someone with Vex's training recognized it as the body language of a predator that had just noticed potential prey. Of course, Theis continued, warming to her theme. The real question is whether they can fight at all without their precious technology. Strip away the projectile weapons, the powered armor, the targeting systems. And what's left? A barely evolved primate with delusions of adequacy. The human finally looked up from her manual. That, she said in a voice like ice water trickling over steel, Sounds like a hypothesis that could be tested. The cantina didn't fall silent. That would have been too dramatic. Instead, conversations simply redirected. The way a river changes course around a particularly interesting obstruction. Every species present had enough survival instinct to recognize when the social dynamics had shifted into potentially dangerous territory. Vex studied the Terran with professional interest. Average height for her species, maybe 1.7 meters. Standard civilian clothing, nothing that screamed military background, though the way she moved suggested otherwise. Dark hair pulled back in a practical style, hands that showed calluses in interesting places, and eyes that had clearly seen things most diplomats never encountered. Testing would require controlled parameters, Quinn 7 said, optical sensors now fully focused on the human, and suitable opponents. I volunteer, this declared, rising to her full 2-meter height. Her chitinous armor caught the cantina's artificial lighting, creating an impressive display of natural weaponry that had evolved specifically for close combat. Purely in the interest of scientific inquiry, of course. Naturally, the human replied, her tone suggesting she found this about as believable as Boruk's claims of intellectual subtlety. Vex found himself speaking before his tactical brain could override his curiosity. The training facility on Deck 7 has adequate space for a practical demonstration, standard safety protocols, medical support standing by, and proper documentation of results. Excellent, Dr. Keela chimed in, her crystalline form practically vibrating with academic excitement. I'll need to record this for my research. The biomechanical analysis alone could fill a dozen papers. What exactly are we analyzing? Boruk asked, though he was already moving toward the cantina's exit with the inevitability of a geological process. The human finished her drink with deliberate care, settled her tab with the bartender, and tucked the atmospheric processor manual into her jacket. Whether humans can fight without guns. And if you lose, Thess inquired, her voice carrying the sort of anticipation usually reserved for particularly violent sporting events. Then I suppose you'll have your answer. The Terran's smile was the kind that should have come with hazard warnings. But if I win, you're buying drinks for the next month, all of you. Acceptable terms, Vex heard himself saying, though his tactical training was now screaming warnings about overconfidence and insufficient intelligence gathering. Though perhaps we should establish what constitutes victory. Simple, the human said, already walking toward the door. Last one standing wins. As they filed out of the cantina, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the sort of mistake that would eventually be used as a case study in military academies. The kind where overconfident officers learned painful lessons about assumptions, incomplete data, and the dangerous gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. Behind them, the bartender, a grizzled Catherian who had been serving drinks to various species for longer than most civilizations had existed, began preparing for what he suspected would be a very interesting evening. In his experience, the most dangerous beings in the galaxy were the ones who smiled when challenged, and the ones who didn't bother to argue about their capabilities. The human, he noted with professional interest, had done both. Word traveled through Nexus Station with the efficiency of a viral outbreak. By the time Vex's group reached Deck 7, the training facility's observation galleries were packed with representatives from 24 species, all eager to witness what promised to be either educational entertainment or spectacular humiliation. The facility itself was a marvel of practical engineering. Variable gravity controls, adjustable atmospheric composition, and enough medical sensors to monitor a small army. Tonight, it would host 3 aliens who had never lost a physical confrontation against anything smaller than a cargo hauler, and 1 human who seemed remarkably unconcerned about those odds. Theiss has 17 confirmed kills in gladiatorial combat, someone in the crowd was explaining to their companion. Her carapace can deflect most handheld weapons, and those secondary arms, each one can exert enough pressure to crush titanium alloy. Quinn 7's impressive too, another voice added. Full cybernetic integration means perfect balance, enhanced reflexes, and impact-resistant chassis. Plus, the Machina don't experience pain or fatigue the way organic species do. Yeah, but Borak's the real terror, came a third opinion. Threnody bone density is 4 times galactic average. Their muscle fibers are essentially organic cables. I've seen him bend structural supports with his bare hands. In the preparation area, the 3 volunteers were making final adjustments to their approach. Thais flexed her 4 arms in sequence, testing joint flexibility and grip strength. Quinn 7 ran diagnostic checks on balance sensors and reaction time algorithms. Borak simply stood there, a mountain of flesh and bone that radiated quiet menace. The Terran, meanwhile, was doing something that looked suspiciously like stretching. Is that exercise? Dr. Keela asked, her translator struggling with the concept. Preparation, the human replied, rotating her shoulders with methodical precision. Wouldn't want to pull something. Vex activated the facility's recording systems and stepped to the observation platform's edge. Standard rules apply. No weapons, no external assistance. Combat continues until clear victory is established or medical intervention becomes necessary. Medical intervention, This repeated with amusement. How thoughtful. The human finished her stretching routine and walked to the center of the combat area. Her opponents formed a rough triangle around her, each one representing a different approach to overwhelming force. This favored quick, slashing attacks with her natural weapons. Quinn 7 relied on calculated precision and mechanical advantage. Borak preferred to simply grab things and squeeze until they stopped moving. Against any other single opponent, each would have been formidable. Against all three simultaneously, most beings would have required heavy armor and substantial firepower just to survive the opening seconds. The human stood in a relaxed stance, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady and controlled. "Begin," Vex announced. This moved first, her warrior's instincts demanding the initiative. She came in low and fast, all four arms extended to create a cage of razor-sharp chitin that could slice through most materials. It was a technique that had never failed against organic opponents. The human stepped inside the attack radius, caught Theis's primary right arm at the wrist, and used the Scarith's own momentum to flip her onto her back with a move that looked like it belonged in a physics textbook. Something cracked, either chitin or the floor beneath it. Before Theis hit the ground, Quinn 7 was already in motion, servomotors whining as he closed distance with mechanical precision. His targeting systems had calculated 17 different strike points that would disable a human opponent within acceptable parameters. The human pivoted, her body becoming a blur of motion that made Quinn 7's sensors struggle to track. Her leg came up in a spinning arc that connected with the Machina's head assembly with enough force to send him staggering sideways, optical sensors flickering as his balance systems tried to compensate for the unexpected impact. Borak, seeing his companions neutralized in seconds, abandoned any pretense of technique. He lunged forward with both massive arms extended, intending to simply grab the human and end the demonstration through overwhelming physical superiority. The Terran dropped into a crouch, slipped under his grasp, and drove her knuckles into a point just below his rib cage with surgical precision. Borak's eyes went wide, his massive frame suddenly rigid, and then he toppled forward like a felled tree. The chronometer read 8.7 seconds. The observation gallery had gone from excited chatter to absolute silence in the time it took most beings to process what they had witnessed. This was attempting to roll over, her secondary arms twitching spasmodically. Quinn 7 stood in place, running system diagnostics that kept returning error messages. Borak wasn't moving at all, though his breathing remained steady. The human straightened up, brushed some dust off her sleeves, and looked around at the stunned faces staring down at her from the gallery. "So," she said with that same dangerous smile, "about those drinks." Dr. Keela's translation unit was making confused noises as it tried to process her rapid note-taking. "Impossible. The biomechanical requirements alone should have. Theiss outweighs her by a factor of 3, and the leverage ratios." "Someone get medical down here," Vex called out, his tactical mind automatically prioritizing practical concerns over the philosophical crisis that was currently reshaping his understanding of human capabilities. "And someone else explained to me what just happened." The human was already walking toward the exit, apparently considering the demonstration complete. "Gravity's the same everywhere," she said conversationally. "Leverage works the same way regardless of species. And pressure points are pressure points, whether you evolved them on Scaros, manufactured them in a Machina facility, or developed them naturally on Thrinod." "But the size differential," someone started to protest. "Is irrelevant if you know what you're doing," the Terran finished. "Which, incidentally, most humans do. We've had a lot of practice." She paused at the facility entrance, looking back at the medical teams now attending to her former opponents. "Oh, and Vex? You might want to file an amended report about human combat capabilities. I suspect your superiors are working with some outdated assumptions." As the door sealed behind her, the gallery erupted into a cacophony of voices, some demanding explanations, others insisting on instant replays, and a few making urgent communications to their respective governments. Vex stood at the observation platform, watching medical personnel work on 3 beings who had just discovered that the galaxy's perceived hierarchy of physical prowess might need some significant revision. His tactical computer was already running probability matrices, calculating the implications of what he had just witnessed. The results were disturbing. Down in the combat area, Theiss managed to sit up, her translator finally functioning well enough to produce coherent speech. "What?" she wheezed. "Was that?" "That," Dr. Keela said, her voice filled with the kind of academic excitement usually reserved for paradigm-shifting discoveries, was apparently how humans fight without guns. The medical bay hummed with diagnostic equipment as 3 very different physiologies underwent very similar examinations. Dr. Weiss, the station's chief xenobiologist, moved between his patients with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to treating injuries that defied conventional understanding. Theiss presents with severe disruption to her exoskeleton's stress distribution network, he announced to the gathered researchers, his Alteran vocal cords producing the sort of clinical detachment that came from decades of cataloging the impossible. The human somehow applied rotational force at exactly the right angle to override her species' natural joint-locking mechanisms. It's like watching someone pick a lock they've never seen before. On the main display, security footage played in slow motion, each frame dissected by analytical algorithms that struggled to quantify what they were observing. The Terran's movements possessed an economy of motion that bordered on the mathematical. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourishes, just brutal efficiency applied with surgical precision. Quinn 7's damage is even more interesting, Dr. Weiss continued, manipulating the cybernetic being's head assembly to examine the impact site. His balance sensors were specifically designed to compensate for unexpected force vectors. The human somehow struck at the exact frequency needed to create harmonic resonance in his gyroscopic systems. It's as if she knew his technical specifications better than his own manufacturers. The Machina's optical sensors flickered weakly. How could an organic being calculate harmonic frequencies during combat? "They don't calculate," came a new voice from the doorway. The Terran entered with 2 cups of something that smelled like synthetic coffee and moved like liquid regret. They learn. Vex looked up from his tactical analysis. Learn what exactly? Everything. The human handed 1 cup to Dr. Weiss and kept the other for herself. Theiss, your species developed exoskeletal armor because your homeworld has predators that attack from multiple angles simultaneously. But that same adaptation creates specific stress points where the plates connect. Anyone who's studied Scarith anatomy for more than a few hours knows where they are. Theiss attempted to sit up straighter, wincing as her carapace creaked ominously. You studied our anatomy? Standard diplomatic preparation, cultural overview, biological basics, social customs, potential medical emergencies. The Terran sipped her coffee, with the expression of someone trying to convince themselves it was actually coffee. Same thing we do for every first contact scenario. And Quinn 7? Dr. Weiss prompted, his scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Machina balance systems use the same gyroscopic principles as human spacecraft navigation. Hit them with the right resonance frequency, and they go haywire. It's basic physics applied to cybernetic engineering. She gestured toward the still-dazed artificial being. Your manufacturers probably warned about it in the technical documentation. Subsection 12.7 Alpha, if I remember correctly. Quinn 7's optical array focused on her with sudden intensity. You've read Machina technical documentation? I've read everyone's technical documentation. Occupational requirement. The human's smile suggested this was somehow amusing rather than terrifying. Borak was actually the most challenging, since Threnody physiology doesn't have obvious weaknesses. Had to go with pressure points instead of structural vulnerabilities. Pressure points, Borak rumbled from his diagnostic table, still somewhat immobilized but increasingly aware. You struck a nerve cluster. Vagus nerve analog, specifically. Most large humanoid species have something similar. It's evolutionary convergence. Hit it right, and you get temporary paralysis without permanent damage. The Terran looked around the medical bay with professional interest. Should wear off in another hour or 2. Might have some residual tingling. Dr. Keela's crystalline structure was practically humming with excitement. This implies systematic study of galactic combat applications. How long have humans been developing these techniques? Couple thousand years, give or take. The human said this with the casual tone most beings reserved for discussing lunch plans. Though we've only been applying them to alien physiology for about 30 years, ever since first contact protocols were established. The medical bay fell silent, except for the gentle hum of diagnostic equipment and the sound of several different species re-evaluating their assumptions about human civilization. 30 years, Vex repeated slowly. You've been studying our weaknesses for 30 years. Not weaknesses, differences. The correction came with a slight edge that suggested the distinction mattered. Every species has biological advantages and disadvantages. Scarith are incredibly tough, but rely on specific structural principles. Machina are precise and tireless, but vulnerable to systems interference. Threnody are massively strong, but share common neurological pathways with most large vertebrates. And humans? Dr. Weiss asked, his clinical detachment wavering slightly. The Terran considered this question while examining the contents of her coffee cup, as if it might contain answers to the universe's deeper mysteries. Humans are adaptable. We don't have the best anything. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most durable. But we're really, really good at figuring out how to use what we have against what you have. This demonstration, Theiss said, her voice carrying a new note of something that might have been respect or might have been concern. This was not your primary combat specialization. It wasn't a question. Diplomatic security, the human confirmed. "I know enough to handle basic threats and emergencies. Mostly I file reports and attend committee meetings about trade regulations." She paused, seeming to consider something. "Though I did teach self-defense classes back on Earth. Kept my instructor certifications current." "Instructor certifications," Quinn 7 repeated, his vocal synthesizers struggling with what sounded suspiciously like horror. "There are more humans with these capabilities." "Well, obviously. You didn't think we'd send our best fighters to diplomatic postings, did you?" The Terran's laugh held the kind of warmth that made everyone in the room profoundly uncomfortable. "I'm here because I'm good at paperwork, and don't get into arguments with alien bureaucrats. The people who are actually good at fighting are doing other things." Dr. Weiss's medical scanner beeped insistently, drawing his attention back to Boruk's neural activity readings. The patterns were interesting. Elevated stress indicators consistent with someone whose world view had just undergone rapid and unwelcome revision. "Other things," Vex said carefully. "Such as?" "Military service mostly, law enforcement. Some go into private security work." The human finished her coffee and stood up, apparently considering the conversation complete. "Point is, if you ever find yourself wondering whether humans can fight without their technology, you might want to remember that we spent most of our evolutionary history doing exactly that." She moved toward the door, then paused as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Theiss? That move I used on you is called a hip throw. It's taught in basic self-defense classes to children as young as 6 years old on most human worlds." The smile that accompanied this information was the sort that should have required licensing by hazardous materials authorities. "Sleep well." As the door sealed behind her, the medical bay's occupants sat in contemplative silence, each processing the implications according to their species' particular approach to existential dread. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of urgent communications being transmitted to various homeworlds, governmental bodies, and military commands. Dr. Weiss returned to his examinations, noting that all 3 patients were showing elevated stress responses despite their injuries being relatively minor. In his professional opinion, the psychological damage was likely to be more lasting than the physical trauma, which, he reflected, might have been the point all along. 3 days later, Vex's office had transformed into something resembling a crisis management center. Reports cascaded across multiple displays, while secure communication channels buzzed with urgent queries from Zenthari High Command, each more urgent than the last. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but caffeine seemed inadequate for processing the cascade of intelligence that had emerged since the demonstration. "Additional data confirms the pattern," his aide, Subcommander Rilk, announced from behind a stack of classified documents that threatened to achieve structural integrity. "Diplomatic personnel on 17 different stations have similar backgrounds. The human assigned to the Kepler negotiations. Former military special operations, trained in something called Krav Maga. The trade liaison at Beta Centauri holds advanced certifications in 7 different combat disciplines." Vex rubbed his temples, a gesture he'd learned from watching humans express frustration. "They're all wolves in sheep's clothing." "Worse than that, sir. According to intercepted communications, these assignments are considered routine postings, low-stress positions for personnel transitioning out of active combat roles." The implications sprawled across Vex's tactical mind like a virus consuming data files. If their diplomats were retired Special Forces operators, what did that suggest about their current military capabilities? More disturbing still, what did it reveal about human strategic thinking? A priority communication alert interrupted his brooding. The holographic display materialized into the imposing figure of Fleet Admiral Korvash, whose expression suggested someone who had recently discovered that fundamental assumptions about reality might require adjustment. "Commander Korthine, I trust your report about human combat capabilities was based on verified observations rather than recreational substances. Verified and recorded, Admiral. Dr. Keela's analysis confirms every detail. Admiral Korvash's silence stretched long enough to make Vex wonder if the communication had failed. Finally, the Diplomatic Corps is receiving inquiries from 14 different species requesting similar demonstrations. The hegemony wants to arrange formal combat trials. The collective is demanding full disclosure of human military specifications. And the human response? That's the interesting part. Their ambassador suggested we organize a cultural exchange program. Apparently, they're willing to teach basic self-defense techniques to interested parties. The Admiral's laugh carried no humor whatsoever. They're turning our security concerns into a public relations opportunity. Before Vex could respond, his office door chimed. The Terran entered without waiting for permission, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who found the universe persistently amusing. Commander, I hope you don't mind the interruption. Wanted to discuss the request for additional combat demonstrations. Admiral Korvash's image shifted focus. The diplomatic attaché. I was hoping to speak with you directly. Of course, Admiral, though I should mention that I won't be handling future demonstrations personally. The human's smile contained layers of meaning that made Vex's threat assessment protocols activate involuntarily. My replacement arrives next week. Replacement? Rotation schedule. Standard diplomatic procedure. Personnel cycle through assignments every 2 years to prevent complications. She consulted her datapad with professional efficiency. My successor has extensive experience in conflict resolution and cultural integration. Former instructor at our Advanced Combat Training Institute, specializes in adaptive fighting techniques for non-standard physiologies. The silence that followed could have achieved its own gravitational field. Advanced Combat Training Institute, Admiral Korvash repeated slowly. One of several, actually. We maintain specialized facilities for different operational requirements. Desert warfare, Arctic conditions, zero-gravity combat, urban environments, diplomatic protection. The Terran trailed off, as if realizing she might be sharing too much information. But that's probably more detail than you need. Vex found his voice. Zero-gravity combat training. Well, obviously, you can't expect people to be effective in vacuum environments without proper preparation. She looked genuinely puzzled by his surprise. Most species have similar programs, don't they? Most species, Admiral Korvash said with careful precision, do not routinely train their diplomatic personnel in advanced combat techniques. Ah. The human nodded, as if this explained a great deal. Cultural difference, then? Humans have found that the best way to maintain peace is to be prepared for the alternative. Diplomatic solutions work better when everyone understands the potential consequences of failure. She activated something on her datapad, and suddenly the office filled with the sound of children's voices. Young humans practicing what sounded suspiciously like combat techniques, with the same enthusiasm most species reserved for recreational activities. This is from a community center on New Geneva Colony, basic self-defense class for 8-year-olds. The recording continued, small voices calling out technical terms, while instructors provided gentle corrections. Most human children learn these fundamentals before they're old enough for formal education, cultural tradition dating back several millennia. The recording ended, leaving Vex to contemplate a civilization that taught combat techniques to children as casually as other species taught mathematics. The cultural exchange program, the Terran continued, apparently oblivious to the existential crisis she was creating, would focus on basic techniques suitable for various physiologies. Nothing too advanced, just enough for personal protection and conflict de-escalation. Think of it as community service. Admiral Korvash's image flickered slightly, suggesting his communication equipment was struggling with the transmission, or his worldview was experiencing similar technical difficulties. And if we decline this generous offer? That's entirely your choice, of course, though I should mention that several other species have already expressed interest. The Viridians are particularly enthusiastic. Apparently, their research indicates significant potential for improved personal security among civilian populations. Vex realized, with the clarity that accompanied truly unpleasant revelations, that he was witnessing masterful strategic manipulation. The humans weren't offering to teach aliens how to fight. They were demonstrating that they had already anticipated every possible response to their capabilities and turned each one into another advantage. "There is one thing I'm curious about," he said, his tactical training finally overriding his shock. "The demonstration in the training facility, was that representative of standard human abilities?" The Terran's pause lasted exactly long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "Commander, I volunteer for diplomatic postings because I enjoy the paperwork and find committee meetings relaxing." Her smile was the kind that belonged in museums under warning labels. The people who find paperwork boring and committee meetings stressful pursue other career paths. After she left, Vex sat in his office surrounded by reports, intelligence assessments, and the growing realization that the galaxy's newest members had been systematically underestimated by everyone who encountered them. The humans had arrived with soft voices and friendly demeanors, establishing trade partnerships and cultural exchanges with the patience of gardeners planting seeds. What they had actually been doing, he now understood, was conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, while politely offering to teach their potential enemies the basics of hand-to-hand combat. His communication system chimed with an incoming message from the human ambassador's office. The subject line read, "Invitation to Cultural Exchange Program. Basic Self-Defense Workshop Schedule attached." Vex opened the file and discovered 23 different workshop categories, each tailored to specific alien physiologies and designed to be taught by qualified instructors with appropriate cultural sensitivity training. He was still staring at the schedule when Sub-Commander Rilk entered with another stack of reports. "Sir, we've received additional intelligence about human military capabilities. It seems their diplomatic corps represents approximately 0.3% of their total trained combat personnel." Vex closed the workshop schedule and looked out his office's viewport at the vast expanse of space, beyond Nexus Station. Somewhere out there, the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered was offering to teach everyone else how to defend themselves, and somehow making it sound like a humanitarian gesture. It was, he had to admit, absolutely brilliant.